Okay, good evening, everybody. This is the Eating Well to Reverse Obesity, Diabetes, and Balance Hormones, Good Hormone Health webinar. And I'm joined today by my good colleague, Dr. Damian Jones, who's a naturopathic physician in Washington, D.C. And we're not going to show Dr. Jones's face, but you can see her picture on screen. She'll be talking for probably about 15 minutes or so, then we'll have some questions for her. Then I'll be talking and we'll have some final questions at the end. Use the chat button to have your questions at the end. And we'll go ahead and start. Dr. Jones, it's a pleasure having you join us. Please go ahead.
Okay. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be able to share this seminar, Dr. Friedman. And we're talking today about eating well to reverse diabetes, obesity, and to balance hormones. So when I think about eating well, I think about more than just what you eat, but I also think about what you drink, your hydration level, what they ate, meaning whatever you're eating, whatever it has eaten, because all the chemicals that they have eaten are now in your body as well. We also think about what times you're eating, or perhaps if you are skipping meals. That's also part of eating well. I also think about, what are you eating and maybe what you're not eating that you might eat that might be better for you, because all of these different scenarios can affect your health. So if we go to the next slide, we'll start with we are what we eat. So we've heard that before, but what does that mean? Well, it's all the different combinations of the foods that we eat. They make up our strength level, our immune system response, our inflammation response. What we eat can change the DNA and can change the way that our cells express themselves. So they can express it either as a healthy cell or as an abnormal cell. And so what we eat really makes a big difference. And so what I recommend for people is that you eat whole foods and that you understand what whole foods are. Not the store whole foods, but actually what whole foods actually are. And so these are 3 requirements that I think are really helpful for understanding what whole foods are. I mean, think about foods in really close to their natural state. So for example, a chicken breast is the muscle from the chicken, whereas chicken nuggets can be, different parts that have been pulled together and different fillings that have been put together. So that would not be considered a whole food, where chicken breast would be considered a whole food. Like I always tend to joke with my patients, I've seen apple trees, but I've never seen Oreo trees. So when we're thinking about whole foods, we want to think about things that are close to their natural state. And then the second thing is foods that are not processed or refined. For example, if we think about cooking brown rice is something that takes about 40 minutes to cook. White rice takes about half the amount of time. The reason why brown rice takes longer is because it's not as processed as white rice. And so as a result, it takes longer to actually get through all of the different fiber and vitamins and nutrients to make it soft enough for us to eat. So that's why we want to look at things that are not processed as opposed to things that are processed. So when things are not processed, they're closer to their natural state. We call those things whole foods. And then finally, the third thing I think about, and just giving general idea about what whole foods are, is they're foods that don't contain synthetic chemicals. I always use this example. So one day I had my girlfriend's son, and we went to 7-Eleven, and he wanted a Slurpee, and he wanted the blue one. And I looked at that color blue, and I was like, that does not appear in nature. I was like, I refuse to give you that as a treat or snack. So instead, we went to the grocery store, We got some blueberries. We got some ice out of the freezer. You know, we put some almond milk, and we made our own Slurpees, and those were things that appeared in nature. It was not synthetic. It was a totally different color. It was purple. It wasn't blue, but it was something that I could feel more comfortable giving him because I knew that it came in a natural state instead of a synthetic or a processed state. So these are the things that I think about when I think about whole foods. So the other thing I'm going to say before we move to the next slide is if you want to think about a list of whole foods, think about fruits, think about vegetables, think about beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, dairy products, lean meats. These are all considered whole foods. Now, I have different thoughts about which ones are better and which ones are worse, but when you're thinking about whole foods, all of those fall into that category, and all of those things would be better than processed foods. So, in particular, as we move to the next slide, you'll see that my focus...
Dr. Day, that
go ahead.
If it has a lot of ingredients that you can't pronounce, you probably don't want to eat it.
Right. Exactly. That's also, yeah, if you can't pronounce the ingredients, you've never seen how those letters go together, probably skip it. And if you think about it, just a really good point, Dr. Friedman, in the grocery store, when you stay to the edges of the grocery store instead of the center of the grocery store, when you look at the bakery section and the fish section and the meat section and the produce section, in all grocery stores, those are around the outside edges. So they tend to have more whole foods. And the packaging actually looks different. So you see on packaging it says salmon, that's what it is, wild salmon. And it doesn't have anything else really associated with it. So that's another very easy way when you go into the grocery store to think about where the whole foods are located. So, what I advocate is people eating more plants, because when we look at health studies, all different types of health studies, but when we look at health studies, one constant theme that we can see when we look at plant-based diets is that plant-based foods tend to help reduce chronic illness and chronic disease. So that means it gets rid of all those diagnoses that we get riddled with, and actually it helps us have more energy, live longer, better, happier lives. So when you eat more plants, what that's going to do is actually going to reduce the risk of things like cancer. For example, look at the Mediterranean diet. And I'm getting some of this information from a study which is called the EPIC study, which looked at cancer and nutrition in European countries. It looked at 10 European countries, looked at over 500,000 people, and one of the things that they realized is when people ate a diet that was plant-based. And if we think about the Mediterranean diet and how that has a lot of information about it, it's focused on plant-based diet with a little bit of a condiment of fish, for example, and good oils, a little bit of red meat, but the focus is really on a plant-based diet. And what they found was the phytochemicals, which are the chemicals that are found in plants that usually color plants, like our flavonoids, our carotenoids. These are things that are phytonutrients. These are examples of that. And they give us the colors of the rainbow in our foods. That when people had a really high diet in different colors, they had lots of antioxidants, it reduced their risk of cancer because the cancer cells actually were not being initiated, the DNA wasn't being changed and initiated, and so the cells tended to produce normally instead of abnormally. And so abnormal cells are the beginnings of cancer cells in our bodies. And that it also helped to reduce the oxidation of our LDL cholesterol, which can get stuck into our blood vessels and can clog our blood vessels and cause blood vessel disease and can cause heart disease. It also looked at the fiber, which is only found in plants. And when we have that fiber, it helps to not only clean out our blood vessels, but it can clean out our digestive system as well. When we look at soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, those two things help to keep our system running really smoothly. And it also created, when we had plant-based diets that specifically had omega-3 fatty acids, it reduced some of the inflammatory pathways that can cause imbalances for us in our body. It can cause imbalances like insulin resistance, for example. And so just focusing on a plant-based diet reduced the risk of cancer by 17%. For those people that ate the Mediterranean diet, they were 17% less likely to get cancer than people who did not. So studies like this start to give us some insight into eating a plant-based diet, starts to reduce a lot of the issues when we think about chronic disease. And so I think it's really important for us to think about adding these fruits and vegetables into our diet at least 50%, and I think 80% to 90% of our diet should be plant-based.
What was the name of the book you wrote, Dr. Day?
The name of the book I wrote is Eat More Plants.
Great.
So I really believe in that. So if we also look at not just what we eat, but we go to the next slide and we say we look at what they ate. This slide actually looks at animals. We'll talk about plants in just a second. But when animals are grain-fed, for example, which the commercial way that they commercially, when they're feeding pigs and cows and things like that, they use grains. That's not the traditional food for those animals. And as a result, the inflammation that happens in the cells of those animals increases. And because of the fact that grains, for example, is not the natural diet for cows, cows start to get more infections, and as a result, they start giving them antibiotics to actually prevent those infections. And the antibiotics that are found in the animals, they actually then filter into us when we eat those animals. So if you think about what they ate, and why people get really, they ask questions about, is this wild versus not wild? Is this food have antibiotics? Does it have grains and other things? It actually increases inflammatory markers in the food, and then when we eat it, our inflammatory markers increase. So obesity is going to increase for us. Our blood sugar levels are going to change. Our immune system is going to be weaker when we have to deal with these pro-inflammatory foods that we're taking into our bodies. So they're toxic in the animals, and they become toxic in our system as well. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to increase our saturated fats. So we don't want to have grain-fed. So that's why when people talk about grass-fed, that's the normal food that these animals ate. That's why we want them to eat that. So if you are going to eat those foods, that's why we look for the higher quality foods, because they actually protect our bodies by eating foods that have had better food given to them. So one of my friends said to me, if you want to be as big as a cow, then eat a cow that's eaten grains and antibiotics. So if you don't want that, then skip out on that and actually spend more money and get the higher quality meats if you are going to eat animal proteins. So the next slide actually talks about inflammation in the body. So if we are eating these foods that are very high in inflammatory markers, you can see these are all the different diseases that have been associated with inflammation. So cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, other neurological diseases, autoimmune diseases. I would add obesity to this list as well, because obesity is inflammation in the body, and that damages our tissues. It creates the development of abnormal cells. It changes our gene expression, and it actually creates different reactions in our bodies and signals in our bodies that actually create disease. And so we want to stay away from that. We want to reduce inflammation by watching the types of foods that we put into our body. We're able to do that. Now, if we're going to look at plants instead of animals, there's still some things we want to look at and we want to stay away from. So the next slide is just a really short, concise slide that really talks about if you're going to eat plant-based foods, you don't want to eat foods that are laden with pesticides. And an organization called the Environmental Working Group has created this really cool list. It's called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. The Dirty Dozen are the foods that are most impacted by being grown with pesticides. And so the Dirty Dozen are foods you would like to stay away from, because when you put those pesticides in your body, again, they can actually start to create inflammation in the body. The Clean 15, these are the foods that you don't have to buy organic, because they're the ones that actually don't, pesticides are not able to seep into all of the cells at the same level or rate. And so these are the ones that are much safer for you to get and not get them organic. So what I usually try to tell people about this slide, and you can go to the Environmental Working Group. The website is ewg.org. The Dirty Dozen are the ones that you want to buy organic, and then just be really careful about those. So whether it's animals or plants, there's some things you want to think about and some things you want to avoid because you don't want to put them into your body. All right, so I only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to move to the next slide, and I want to talk about poor eating habits. So, yes,
summarize what foods give you inflammation besides those that have pesticides in them and the grain-fed animal products?
Yes, that's the perfect question. So there's a group of foods that if people tend to have inflammatory problems, they're called nightshades, the nightshade family, and they're potatoes and tomatoes and eggplant and bell peppers. The chemicals that are found in those foods, while some things can be very healthy for us, some of those tend to cause more inflammation. So if people have inflammation, they have pain, I generally tell them to stay away from those types of foods because they actually can even make that even worse. So I tend to have people stay away from those type of foods. Personally, I don't recommend dairy products for patients. I find that they tend to be inflammatory as well. And some people have enzyme deficiencies so that they don't process dairy products really well. And other people may have allergies to dairy products. So I tend to stay away from dairy products because they can actually cause inflammation. They can cause mucus and form mucus in the body and congestion in the body. So I tend to recommend people staying away from those. If you have celiac disease, and there are a lot of people that do not have celiac disease, but also tend to have a sensitivity towards gluten products, I might recommend that people stay away from those products as well. The thing that's a little bit tricky about gluten products is a lot of gluten products are processed foods. So if you stay away from a lot of processed foods, you will tend to start to stay away from gluten foods as well, even though they're starting to make different types of foods because those are refined. So that refined food, that processed food, the cookies, cakes, donuts, white bread, all of those things tend to cause inflammation in the body because they turn into sugar very quickly in the body, and that can cause inflammation in the body as well. So processed foods I would tend to stay away from. Again, foods, animal products that are grain-fed, I would stay away from those too. So those are kind of my hot points. What do you think, Dr. Friedman? Any others you want to add?
I agree with you completely. I think maybe there's too much emphasis on gluten-free and not enough emphasis on avoiding processed foods.
Yes.
You're right. Many foods that have gluten are processed, the cookies and the cakes and the donuts, stay away from them because they're processed.
Right. Yeah. So I think that that's really the key to why people start feeling better is because they're staying away from the processed food. And this conversation is exactly what we talk about in terms of poor eating habits, doing too much processed foods. Also, for some people, caffeine products can actually cause them to not feel well, to feel jittery. It can cause hormonal imbalances. Sometimes people that are eating a lot of coffee or a lot of caffeine for energy, they really have cortisol imbalances. They've been pushing themselves so much that the cortisol levels actually have become out of balance, and they're so low that they're actually looking for quick energy, and that's why they look for those caffeine or coffee for energy. So that's something that I think people should think about. Too much alcohol can actually cause inflammation in the body as well. It actually depletes our body of nutrients that we need. It prevents us from sleeping as well as we could. And when we start having difficulties with sleep, that it throws off our hormones for hunger and satiety. It also can actually start to create insulin resistance in our bodies when we don't get enough sleep. So these poor eating habits are really important because they actually can contribute to other disease processes that we might not think about that are associated with sleep and with our health. And then I think people know skipping meals and skipping breakfast can cause problems. And what it does, the slide that you just showed is a perfect example of leading into what I was going to talk to people about. When we eat highly processed foods or high sugar foods, what we do is we create a vicious cycle in our body where we're putting in foods that turn into sugar into our bloodstream really quickly. Our pancreas then actually shoots out a hormone called insulin, which is used for blood sugar balancing. So you may be aware of it when you think about diabetes. If our insulin levels go up really quickly, then our blood glucose levels will go, all the blood glucose goes into our cells, and then the blood glucose level in our bloodstream goes down really quickly. Now all of a sudden we have low blood sugar levels. We might feel irritable. We might feel kind of frustrated, lack of focus. We might feel hungry for foods even though we just ate. Our body then has to liberate a stress hormone called cortisol to actually get the blood glucose levels to come back up. And we create this really vicious cycle throughout the day when we skip meals or we eat really refined meals. If we go to the next slide, we can see that when we eat whole foods and when we decide that we're going to have foods that are nutrient dense, is what I think about when I think about whole foods. You see that arc goes from spiking to actually a really nice arc that goes up and down. And these are more normal levels for our body, and they prevent, the cortisol spiral that I call it that happens when we're not eating appropriately. So the next slide is a picture that I thought was so characteristic of what Americans eat. When we skip meals, then the next time we eat, we tend to overeat. This is a picture of a family. This is what they eat in 1 week's time. And it comes from a book. I can't remember the name of the book. We'll get it for you when Dr. Friedman starts talking. And it actually shows what 1 week of food looks like around the world, and they're beautiful pictures, and it shows us that in other parts of the world they eat a lot more whole food and they eat a lot less processed food. So this kind of gives us an example of what the typical American diet looks like in a week.
They have a little bit of some grapes there and maybe a little bit of lettuce, I think.
Wait till you see some of the other slides in the book, which is a beautiful book. It looks very different than the way this looks. So just to finish up, because Dr. Friedman has so much information for you, I'm just going to say quickly that eating well is very important. But if you don't consider movement, you don't consider good sleep, and you don't consider stress management, then you also are going to have issues that will lead to diabetes and obesity and thyroid problems and PMS and menopausal problems, because our hormones can get imbalanced. So movement, if we look at the next slide, it improves so many things. It improves your mood. It helps to combat chronic diseases. It helps you manage your weight. It helps strengthen your heart and your lungs. It helps with better sleep. It sparks up your sex life, your energy. It's fun. So movement is a good way to start to combat some of these diseases that we're talking about, along with eating well. Eating well is the most important thing to do. When you don't have good sleep, you can actually have problems that I talked about before. If you eat late at night or you drink alcohol, it'll keep you up. You can have a disruption of your sleep patterns. Drinking coffee sometimes or sodas will do that as well. And those things actually contribute to chronic disease and hormonal imbalance. But when you actually have a sleep hygiene, which is the next slide, when you have a ritual that you do every single night, going to sleep at the same time, waking up at the same time, turning off the TV and your electronics, you actually improve your sleep. So good sleep hygiene, which is the next slide, helps you to actually create a better balance. So, that's a slide that kind of just goes over what I just said. And then finally, stress is real. It's not just, oh, I'm feeling so stressed right now, but there's physical stress and emotional stress and mental stress, and there are body changes that happen as a result of having physical, emotional, or mental stress in your body. Digestive complaints, cholesterol problems, weight gain, female issues, fatigue, colds and flus, so that we actually have to, if we go to the next slide, we'll see that stress management techniques, looking at ways to manage your stress, will help you to be able to have better overall outcomes. So I think maybe we'll do questions at the end, and I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Friedman, unless there's anything else you want me to speak about before I pass it over to you.
I think that was a great job. Yeah, I'll go ahead now. We'll do the questions at the end.
Okay.
It was very interesting and very enlightening. It goes along with what I'm saying. Okay.
Great.
We did
Thank
that one
you.
here. Okay. Okay. So I agree with Dr. Day that, you want to be healthy or change what you eat. There's different options: low fat, low calories, low carbohydrates, more vegetables, and less processed food. I rarely recommend all these. However, I'm going to emphasize tonight the more vegetables, because I think it's often better to add things than to subtract things. And I encourage people to eat a lot of vegetables. I have on my website the Vegetable Revolution diet. And I pass it out at my county patients in Los Angeles. Vegetables have a lot of nutrition and little calories. Vegetables provide you with excellent sources of minerals and vitamins, give you fiber and fill you up, and therefore you will not need to eat as much of the high-calorie foods. You can eat as much vegetables as you want, except for corn and potatoes, which are starches and not real vegetables, but try to eat 3 servings per meal, and this includes breakfast. In the past, people have shied away from vegetables due to the fact that they required a lot of preparation or went bad readily. Now vegetables are often washed and come in a large variety of preparations and readily available in stores like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. And some of them are ready to go. You just eat them. Some of them are frozen, that you can put them in the microwave. There are many choices that you don't have to get fresh. Freshes are great. If you have a farmer's market and get fresh vegetables, that's fantastic. A lot of times those are not that accessible to people. So I think frozen vegetables are an excellent choice. They're convenient. You can put them in the microwave, and I have my frozen vegetables for breakfast every morning from the microwave. You can even do canned vegetables. They're also a good choice and fairly healthy for you. If you do have high blood pressure, you can rinse off the salt in the canned vegetables. Vegetables can be stir-fried with vegetable spray like Pam, canola spray or olive spray. You can use soy sauce as long as you're not on a low-salt diet. Vegetables can be flavored with spices, soy sauce, tomato sauce, or marinara sauce. Vegetables can be made into soups, and that gives you the bulk of the vegetables plus the liquid of the soup fills you up. And try to decrease your starches like potatoes, rice, beans, bread, pasta, cereals, and tortillas. Another way to get vegetables in you is to blend them, and I want to highlight the differences between juicing and blending. Juicing extracts the liquid from vegetables and leaves behind the fiber. Blending, on the other hand, includes the fiber, and you drink all the fruit and vegetables. Blending is a great way to take in a lot of vegetables. You can read the interview that Dr. Day did with myself on drinking your fruits and vegetables, and also I have an article based on that on Good Hormone Health, and Dr. Day's interview with me is on Good Hormone Health and also on Power, EMPOWHER.com. Each of these has 200 calories, 8 cups of broccoli, 1 cup of pasta, 1/4 cup of almonds. Each one of these will help you lose more weight, and I think everybody would know the broccoli. The pasta is more calorically dense, and the almonds, although they have some good nutrition in them, are very calorically dense. So they do have a lot of calories. So if you want to watch your weight, stick with the vegetables, and eat vegetables that have low calories and lots of vitamins. People always ask me, Dr. Friedman, I don't like my vegetables. Can I just take a pill? And the answer is no. Vegetables have fiber, natural antioxidants, things that help prevent your cells from getting old. They have lots of vitamins and minerals. It's best to eat vegetables with different colors. Vitamins, on the other hand, are unregulated. There's multiple studies showing that eating vegetables leads to better health, and Dr. Day mentioned some of them. Every single study you do shows that eating vegetables is healthy for you. There's controversy about low fat or high fat or this or that. Every single study with vegetables is positive. There's been several studies that show that supplements don't improve your health. And for example, there was a study with a supplement called beta carotene that people thought was healthier for them, but then when they actually did a study on it, people who took that got more heart disease and more cancer than otherwise. So it's really best to eat your vegetables in their natural form in the vegetables and not to reach for the bottle and try to take a vitamin. Dr. Day mentioned about fiber. Fiber is really helpful for you. Fiber fills you up. It keeps you from being constipated. Many studies have shown that it prevents colon cancer. It probably prevents some of the detrimental effects of sugar. Fiber is in vegetables and fruit, in beans and legumes like peas. There's a lot of fiber. Whole grains like barley, oats, whole wheat bread, brown rice. They do have a lot of fiber, but I often say they should be eaten in moderation. A lot of people eat a lot of these whole grains, and then they have a lot of calories to them. So if you look at a bag of brown rice, that it might serve, it says on it, it might serve 16 servings, but you're going to eat much more of that. It might have, 100 calories per serving, so a little bag has 1,600 calories. So it does have a lot of calories often with a fair amount of fiber, but I would watch the portion control on them. We talked about processed foods. Processed foods are something that doesn't exist in nature. Avoid foods with lots of ingredients, especially those you can't pronounce. Avoid foods with lots of sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and a lot of salt, and stick to the foods that are in similar form as they exist in nature. You don't have a TV dinner tree or a battered chicken tree. You have an orange tree and a lemon tree, so stick with those. I want to bring up the concept of glycemic index. Glycemic index is a scale that ranks carbohydrates by how much they raise blood glucose levels compared to a reference food. Things that are simple carbohydrates and processed foods have a high glycemic index. They raise your sugar, and as Dr. Day said, they raise your insulin. Complex carbohydrates and food with a lot of fiber have a low glycemic index. Foods high in glycemic index leads to release of insulin. Foods high in fiber decreases insulin release. There's a lot of factors, and I won't go into this at all tonight, but there's different factors that affect the glycemic index, including cooking and processing and protein content and fat content and all those. But in general, you would really watch what you should be watching the simple carbohydrates and the processed foods because they have a high glycemic index. Are there documented benefits to lowering the glycemic index of one's diet? You get lower blood glucose levels, lower cholesterol levels, decreased weight, decreased heart disease risk, and decreased diabetes risk. So what should you eat? How to increase the consumption of low glycemic index foods. You can eat high fiber breakfast such as oats, bran, and barley, but they have some fair amount of calories associated with them. You can add berries, nuts, flax seeds, and cinnamon to your high glycemic index cereals. Those are helpful. Or you can try to avoid the glycemic index in general, which is really what I recommend, that contains simple carbohydrates. So you don't have to eat cereal for breakfast. You can eat your stir-fried vegetables with some egg, or you can microwave your vegetables or eat some soups or something like that. You have to think in the non-traditional breakfast. How does this relate to your hormones, such as insulin? Foods high in glycemic index lead to the release of insulin. Foods high in fiber decrease insulin release. Insulin facilitates the conversion of energy into fat. Insulin stores fat for a rainy day and leads to weight gain. When insulin levels drop, the body starts to burn fat and weight loss occurs. There's a hormone called leptin made in the fat cells. Normally, leptin tells your body to make less insulin so you don't store fat. In patients that are obese or have Cushing syndrome, the leptin doesn't turn off the insulin, so you keep on converting energy to fat. So what's the problem with high insulin levels? High insulin levels block leptin, so you feel hungry even when you're full. And insulin resistance, which occurs in obesity, your insulin doesn't bind to the receptor process properly and doesn't signal downstream, and you fail to get the sense that you're full. You get more dopamine release when you eat, so you get more reward in your brain after eating the comfort foods. These are foods that your mother used to make, like macaroni and cheese and mashed potatoes. You become, quote unquote, addicted to food. Every time you eat, you sort of get a little buzz from it, and you want to eat more and more. Low glycemic foods, high glycemic foods leads to release in insulin. Those are the simple carbohydrates. Eating high fiber foods prevents the release of insulin, and high insulin and insulin resistance leads to disease, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer.
Yeah.
How does inflammation affect hormones? Processed foods have high omega-3s. They increase your inflammatory hormones that are made by the fat cells, such as adiponectin. Inflammation leads to high cortisol. The high cortisol can lead to diabetes, heart disease, and cancers. And this is a controversial area that really there's no literature on it, but I think some of it makes a little intuitive sense, but not to the way some people ascribe it. Inflammation may exacerbate autoimmune diseases such as Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, but it doesn't give you Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, and not everybody with Hashimoto's has to be on a low inflammation diet. But if you're sort of borderline and you're not treated, you may want to watch your inflammatory foods, and as Dr. Day said, the nightshade vegetables, for example, but especially the processed foods. Omega-3s, I'm sorry, I think I have this backwards. Omega-3s are good for you and decrease your inflammation. Omega-6s are the processed foods that increase your inflammation. And vegetables and high fiber foods decrease inflammation. Now, I like to try to go on the literature, and I try to look in the literature a lot. But, the general feeling that I get and Dr. Day gets, and I think most people that are sort of in tune with how people eat, feel that you eat a dirty diet, lots of processed foods, lots of simple carbohydrates, things that release insulin. You feel tired, sluggish, bloated, poor sleep, and your hot flashes get worse. You eat a clean diet with lots of vegetables, the so-called paleo diet, without many processed foods, some protein, and mainly vegetables. You feel more energy, weight loss, and you have better cognition. So in general, I think that eating well complements my endocrine approaches, allows you to do all you can do for good hormone health, and balances what we as endocrinologists can do to balance your hormones. It has multiple long-term health benefits and adds years to one's life. So we can stay in touch. This is Dr. Day's website, healthydays.com. It's excellent. She has a Facebook and a Twitter account. She has a YouTube that you can search on Dr. Damian Jones. Is that the best way to find you on YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, folks, I have no social media. I don't think I'm going to get social media. I don't know, maybe Dr. Day convinced me otherwise, but I have a good website. I think that has lots of articles, and we will be posting this webinar on my website, and I think on Dr. Day's website as well in a couple days.
Yep.
Okay, so let's open it up to some questions. We had a few already, I think.
Okay.
You can use the chat button. Try to have one question per person until everybody has a chance. And where did it go? Okay, so Judith asked, what about grass-fed grain, but grain finished? Dr. Dave, do you understand? Judith wants to elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. So it's grass-fed at some point, and then at some point it switches to grain-fed is what I'm thinking the question is. Yeah. And if that's the question, as soon as you stop giving someone their normal diet, just like Dr. Friedman just said, when you eat a diet that's not a whole foods diet, you start having energy, lack of energy, you start getting sick more often, you don't feel as well, and you're more prone to chronic disease. The same thing would happen for animals. So if animals are eating all grass-fed, it's going to actually be a healthier animal than one that's grass-fed and at some point it's switched to grain-fed, then it will actually start to get sick the same way we would when we stop eating a really healthy diet. So I look at it the same way.
And in terms of poultry, is it sort of a similar thing as with beef, that you should try to have your free-range poultry versus the poultry that's kept in a cage?
Yes, one of the things that's really interesting about this concept that we really have to kind of check into is that when you have cage-fed animals that are in cages, they're not exercising, they're not getting, they're not working out. And one of the things that they'll do is they'll put all these chickens in cages, and they'll keep them in cages for 6 or 7 or 8 weeks, and then they'll open like a little door that they could go out if they wanted to, but they've already been conditioned to be in cages, so then they actually never go outside. So we have to actually make sure that if we're eating foods that are grain-fed, including chickens, that they actually are able to go out and they're to walk around. Free range is what it's called, that they actually have that opportunity to do that. And you want to think about that for the eggs as well, because again, the animal is laying the eggs. So if the animal has a lot of inflammation, then the egg is going to have more inflammation. If you have free range eggs and you have free range chickens, then you're actually having a healthier animal that you're actually taking in and eating for yourself.
Right.
Yep.
Hope Eternal says, good stuff. Thank you, Hope Eternal. Kelly says, I have worked hard to do many of the things you mentioned. The problem is I avoid fish because I'm concerned about toxins. Okay. I would really like to put fish back in my diet. What is your suggestion? Dr. Day, do you want to start with that one? I'll add on to it.
Okay, so one of the things that I would do is I would get to become really good friends with your local markets so that you can ask them where the fish is coming from. I'm going to refer back again to the website environmentalworkinggroup.org, and you can go there to look at information about like mercury and parts of the seas that actually have more or less where you want to buy your food from, and then go and ask it's not a butcher, but the person who deals with the seafood, ask them where these came from and find out more about where they're from. And when you find a safe place of where they're from, then you can buy that and you can feel really good and confident that you are getting fish that you can feel good about. The other thing is start to learn about the sizes of fish, because the smaller the fish, the less likely it's going to have as many toxins as like the huge big fish. So again, just asking about where your food comes from will allow you to be able to integrate that more into your diet.
From what I understand, the mercury is a big problem in tuna, but if you get like Atlantic salmon, it doesn't have much mercury at all. It doesn't have any toxins. Is that
It doesn't have as many, but a lot of Atlantic is not wild. So
yeah, you want to get wild salmon, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, you want to get wild. But again, the environmental working group, like they have so much information about these things about pesticides, about mercury, so that you can actually learn about it and that you can understand it, and then you can ask, you know, where's my fish coming from, and then you can actually get fish that you can feel comfortable having.
Great.
Yep.
Lisa asks, would you agree to stay away from canned foods as most enzymes are removed in the canning process? I would say no. I mean, I think most vegetables, they're canned very rapidly and very, you know, they're canned when they're properly ripe. Well, when you get, you know, foods delivered fresh, unless you sort of get lucky with your farmer's market, they're a lot of times sent early. So I think the canning process is reasonable, and canned food, I think, is a reasonable choice for people. Dr. Day, do you have any thoughts on canned food?
Yeah, I actually do. I have a couple thoughts. So one thing I'm going to say is my favorite canned foods to have are beans and legumes. I actually think that because they take a long time to cook. Like, I don't necessarily have 2 hours to make black-eyed peas like every week. So I definitely think when you're thinking about canned foods, use those, rinse them off to get rid of the food, the processing liquid, and then you can squeeze a little bit of lemon on them to actually kind of like perk them up a little bit in whatever it is that you're going to eat. So that would be what I would say is what I'm really excited about. I tend, like you said, I tend to like frozen better than canned. I think it maintains flavor as well as nutrients a little bit better than canned. I think that canned vegetables are a little bit soggier, so I like my food, I like them a little bit more al dente. I think you can do a little bit more with fresh or with frozen than canned, but it's better to have vegetables than not. So depending on the way your kitchen is set up, how much space you have, how much time you have, I think that you should always just go for the best that you absolutely can do, no matter what.
Excellent, great. Judith says, agree with everything you have to say. Right on. Thank you, Judith. Other questions? Any other questions? Don't be shy, everybody. Dr. Day, do you have any other closing thoughts? Or?
I do have a question.
Okay.
What about GMOs in our vegetables?
So here's my thought about that.
Then I'll talk a little.
If there's, if you can find foods, and some are labeled and some are not, which is part of the really big problem, that are not modified foods, I think that that's always better. And one of the challenges is knowing your grocer or knowing where you're getting the foods from or what the seeds are, if they have it or if they don't, or having access to it. People are political. They're in other countries, they don't have GMO foods because the people that live in those countries say, no way, we don't want it. And the more we make people aware that that's not what we want, and our dollars go in that direction, those things will change, and it'll be a lot easier to be able to identify things that are GMO or not, or we can have them banned.
I'll say something controversial. I'm in favor of GMO foods, and we've had a food industry that has worked on breeding foods to be healthier, more stable, less prone to rot, less prone to be infected with insecticides for thousands of years. And, in the Bible times, people would breed their produce together to make them hardier. I think that's all part of how we can use nature for our advantage. I heard that a sort of a lecture on health disparities that felt that a lot of people in these inner cities, their food they get in the grocery store has already gone bad by the time they get there. If they were using foods that were bred to be more stable and not go bad as quickly, then they would get to the stores better and be better on that. So I think there's a lot of types of GMO foods, and you have to be savvy about what you think is important and what not. but I think there's been a little bit too much of movement against it that I don't agree with. But that's my opinion.
Okay.
We'll go on to Shannon about how do you feel about snacking?
I love snacking. I mean,
Okay.
I love snacking when you eat healthy
Right.
snacking options.
Right. I think the problem is when people eat 3 big meals and then they add something on top of that. Or if they're really hungry and they reach for, a candy bar and call that a snack. And then I think one of these days I'm going to give a talk on, sort of food mislabeling. Every company wants to sell you their foods and wants to make it sound healthy. So we'll add things like this is a healthy snack, low fat, low cholesterol, all natural, gluten-free. And a lot of things like, granola bars and things like that, they're built to be healthy. They're just candy bars, basically, with a little bit more, maybe a little bit more fiber in them.
Right.
So I think you still have to watch what you snack. And I think people use the term snacking to say, I'll just eat a little bit in between meals extra. That's not that healthy.
Yeah, I do small meals. I just did a cooking demonstration today with NBC. We have a really large health and fitness expo every year here in DC. And I was talking to people about eating a salad plate and not eating any more than that. And the reason why I was talking to them about that is if they do that, you wait 20 minutes before you go and you eat again, a lot of times you will actually start to have smaller portion sizes. And so if you have like smaller portion sizes, then when you snack during the day, it's actually like stoking the fires of a, fireplace. And it actually can help with your metabolism to eat the same amount of food 5 times a day instead of 3 times a day. So again, just emphasizing what Dr. Friedman said is you can't eat 3 large meals and then just do a whole bunch of snacking. You need to have really good portion control and then the snacks and the meals at the end of the day, particularly if they have fruits, vegetables, plant-based, beans, nuts and seeds. A little bit less of the nuts and seeds if you're worried about weight management. But doing that would really, really help you to just feel satisfied throughout the day.
Right. Kelly asked about, I check, my natural, quote-unquote, diet from time to time. My fiber is high along with slightly elevated fats. I can adjust the fats, but I need to adjust for the fiber. I don't eat many grains. I think, Kelly's sounds like she's doing great. She wants probably keep on pushing those vegetables that have high fiber and low fat. And you'll do fine. I think you don't need to eat that many grains if you eat a lot of vegetables.
Yeah, I'm very lazy. I'm a very lazy person. So even though I've written 2 books about food and food choices, grains take too long. Like I can stir fry some vegetables in 10 minutes, but to cook grains take me like 30 or 40 minutes. So I actually don't eat a lot of grains. I don't have bread in my house. Like I just don't do that, and I don't miss it, at all. And I compensate by eating more vegetables actually than anything else. And it works really well for me, and it's really lovely, and I don't miss the grains. So.
Okay, Dr. Day said, hello, Carrie. I find that especially have people that especially have psoriatic arthritis. Special diets have been very successful. Have you tried that lately? And also lowering inflammation will lower your pain and help your Addison's as well. So I think I agree with that. A nice clean diet should help these inflammatory diseases like psoriatic arthritis. Dr. Day, was that your point? Or?
Yep, that was it.
Okay, super. Kelly asks, I've heard about weight set points. Is there the same thing with calories? Do you know what she means by that?
I'm not sure what a weight set point is.
I think there's controversy about can you eat have too little calories, and you go into starvation mode. I don't think that's true particularly. I think people, if they can cut down on their calories and they can go. I don't think I would go that much less than 1,000 a day. Yep. But I think if people go down to about 1,000 calories a day, they'll lose weight. And they won't go into starvation mood. They'll burn out they'll use up their fat, which yep. I think is what they want to do. But especially if those 1,000 calories are pretty healthy, you'll do fine.
Actually, it's interesting. There have been a couple of studies, not a lot, but there have been a few studies, and I'm sure you know about these already, that really talk about people that eat like a really low caloric diet and do it for an extended period of time, and they actually do prove to be healthier and more able to have more longevity is part of the reason why they were looking at that. They don't recommend it for everybody, but those studies have shown that. I mean, they admit that they tend to be hungry like most of the time, and I don't think that's a fun and healthy life by any stretch of the imagination. But they've actually shown good outcomes for health and longevity in those studies.
I think if people do a healthy diet with a lot of fiber at about 1,000 calories, I don't think they're going to be that hungry. I think, especially if it's even, doesn't release, their low glycemic foods that don't release their insulin, I think they'll do fine. I think, yes, the body tries to prevent weight loss. I talk about that in my talk from last time on how hormones prevent weight loss, that some of the hormones designed sort of kick in when you're losing weight to get you to lose less weight. But you can override that by just constantly, eating healthy foods and exercising, things like that. Kelly asks, there's a lot of years that I ate 600, 800 and felt stuffed. Now my natural's about 800, 1,800 to 2,000. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on all your other hormones and your other health conditions for sure. But, if you want to lose weight, I think about 1,000 to 1,500 calories a day would be great. Okay, why don't we close it at that? I thank everybody for participating, and Dr. Day, it was a pleasure chatting with you tonight, and thanks so much.
I really enjoyed it. Hope everybody has a great evening and a great week next week.
Thank you.
This